My husband looked me in the eyes and said God had called him to give everything we had, our savings, our emergency fund, even the money we'd set aside for our daughter's surgery. I wanted to believe him, but 3 months later I discovered the money had never reached a single orphan, missionary, or charity. Someone had stolen our future, wearing a pastor's smile. On the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina, Ethan and Claire Johnson lived a simple but fulfilling life. They were the kind of family everyone admired. Ethan worked as an electrical engineer, while Claire managed a small pediatric clinic. Together, they had built a comfortable middle-class life through years of discipline, sacrifice, and unwavering faith. Every Sunday morning, they dressed in their best clothes, held hands with their 8-year-old daughter, Lily, and drove to New Hope Kingdom Center, one of the fastest-growing churches in the city. The church was unlike any they had ever attended. Its worship was powerful. The sermons were passionate. Volunteers greeted every visitor with warm smiles, and hundreds of people packed the auditorium each week, convinced they had found a place where miracles happened. At the center of it all stood Pastor Daniel Brooks. Handsome, charismatic, and remarkably persuasive, he had a gift for making every person feel personally seen. His words were confident, compassionate, and filled with stories of impossible breakthroughs. Families claimed debts had disappeared. Business owners spoke of unexpected success. Couples testified that their marriages had been restored after following his teachings. Claire appreciated his encouragement, but Ethan admired him. After a men's leadership conference, Pastor Brooks noticed Ethan sitting quietly in the back row and invited him to stay behind. "You have the heart of a servant," the pastor told him. "God is preparing you for something greater." Those words settled deep within Ethan's heart. Soon, the pastor invited him to monthly mentoring breakfasts with a small group of trusted men from the church. They prayed together, studied scripture, and discussed living lives of complete surrender to God. For the first time in years, Ethan felt truly understood. Claire was happy to see her husband becoming more confident, but she also noticed subtle changes. Their evenings, once spent talking as a family, became filled with church meetings. Weekends disappeared into volunteer projects. Conversations increasingly revolved around sacrifice, obedience, and trusting God's plan without hesitation. Whenever Claire questioned whether Ethan was spending too much time at church, he smiled gently. "I'm just trying to become the husband and father God wants me to be." She wanted that too, so she pushed aside the uneasy feeling growing in her heart. As the months passed, Pastor Brooks' messages became increasingly focused on one theme: faith, he declared from the stage, isn't measured by what you keep. It's measured by what you're willing to surrender. Congregation erupted in applause. "The greatest miracles," he continued, "always begin with the greatest sacrifice. When you release what you cannot protect, God releases what only He can provide." Giant screens displayed photographs of orphanages, disaster relief projects, and missionaries serving in remote villages around the world. "We are building God's kingdom," the pastor proclaimed. "Every seed you sow becomes a harvest in someone else's life, and God never forgets a faithful giver." Ethan sat in the front row, completely captivated. Claire applauded with everyone else. But for reasons she couldn't explain, she couldn't ignore the quiet question lingering in her mind. How much sacrifice was enough? She had no idea that this question would soon change everything their family believed about trust, generosity, and the people they had chosen to follow. The weeks following Pastor Daniel Brooks' message changed something inside Ethan. Every sermon seemed to echo the same promise: "Your miracle is waiting on the other side of your sacrifice." Words replayed in his mind during his morning commute at work, and even as he lay awake at night. One Saturday morning, Ethan arrived early for another men's mentoring breakfast. After prayer, Pastor Brooks looked around the table before speaking softly. "God is calling a few faithful families to partner with a special mission project. This isn't for everyone. It's only for those willing to trust Him beyond what makes sense." Room fell silent. Photographs appeared on a projector: children in orphanages, villages without clean water, missionaries preaching beneath makeshift tents, disaster victims waiting for food and medicine. "Goal is to transform thousands of lives," Pastor Brooks said. "But real kingdom work requires uncommon faith." Ethan felt his heart racing. After the meeting, he quietly approached the pastor. "What if someone wants to give everything they can?" Pastor Brooks smiled. "Only you can know what God is asking of you." That single sentence settled every doubt Ethan had been carrying. Over the next several days, he prayed constantly. He opened his Bible each morning, asking God for confirmation. Every verse about generosity seemed to speak directly to him. One evening, after Claire and Lily had gone to bed, Ethan logged into their online banking account. He stared at the balance: years of careful saving, the emergency fund, their daughter's medical savings, the money they had been setting aside for a larger home. His finger hovered above the keyboard. For several long moments he couldn't move. Then he whispered a prayer. "Lord, if this is truly your will, take away my fear." With trembling hands, he entered the amount, almost everything they owned. The transfer confirmation appeared on the screen. Recipient: New Hope Kingdom Center Special Global Mission Fund. Ethan closed his eyes. Instead of panic, he felt overwhelming peace. He imagined Claire crying tears of joy when God multiplied their blessing. He pictured their family sharing a testimony before the entire church. He never intended to hide the truth forever. He simply wanted to wait until God performed the miracle. For the next several weeks, he said nothing. Whenever Claire mentioned their finances, he smiled confidently. "Everything's going to work out." She assumed he was talking about his upcoming promotion. Then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Claire stopped by the mailbox after work. Mixed between grocery coupons and advertisements was a thick envelope stamped, "Final Notice." Her stomach tightened. Inside was an overdue mortgage statement: payment overdue, late fees added, immediate action required. Confused, she hurried inside and opened their banking app. The screen loaded. She refreshed it once, then again. The available balance barely covered a week's worth of groceries. The emergency savings account was almost completely empty. Claire stared at the phone in disbelief. Her hands began to shake. There had to be some mistake. Then she opened the transaction history. Near the top of the screen was a transfer so large it stole the air from her lungs. Her eyes froze on the destination: New Hope Kingdom Center Special Global Mission Fund. She whispered Ethan's name, not in anger, not yet, but in absolute disbelief. Claire didn't sleep that night. The glowing numbers from the banking app replayed in her mind over and over again. The transfer, the empty savings account, the overdue mortgage, none of it made sense. Ethan sat quietly at the edge of their bed, unable to meet her eyes. "I was going to tell you," he whispered. Claire turned toward him, tears filling her eyes. "You gave away almost everything we had." He nodded. "I believed God was asking me to." Her voice trembled. "Without telling me." Silence filled the room. For the first time since they had married, trust felt more fragile than money. The next morning they drove together to New Hope Kingdom Center. Surely there had been a misunderstanding. Pastor Brooks wasn't available. An assistant greeted them politely and assured them he was in an important meeting. Claire calmly explained that they simply wanted documentation showing where the Special Global Mission Fund had been distributed. The assistant smiled. "The reports aren't available yet." "When will they be available?" Claire asked. "Not sure." She requested receipts. None were provided. She asked for audited financial statements. "We don't release internal records." She asked to speak with the church treasurer. "He isn't available today." Every answer seemed carefully rehearsed. As they walked back to the parking lot, Claire stopped. "Doesn't this seem strange to you?" Ethan didn't answer. He simply stared at the church building. Over the following weeks, Claire refused to let the matter go. She contacted several families she knew had contributed to the same mission project. Many believed the money had already been sent overseas. None had ever seen a financial report. One former volunteer quietly admitted she had asked similar questions months earlier. Soon afterward, she was removed from the finance ministry. That conversation became the first crack in the perfect image Ethan had trusted. Claire continued digging. Public charity filings listed one amount: Church announcements claimed another. Annual fundraising totals didn't match the organization's published reports. The numbers simply didn't add up. Then an anonymous envelope arrived at their home. Inside was a flash drive. No return address. No note. Only a single handwritten message. You deserve to know the truth. Claire inserted the drive into her laptop. Hundreds of internal expense records appeared on the screen. Luxury hotel invoices, first-class airline tickets, private jet charter receipts, designer clothing purchases, five-star resort reservations, payments for imported luxury furniture, high-end watches, monthly vehicle leases for luxury sport utility vehicles and exotic sports cars. The payment descriptions all referenced the same account, Special Global Mission Fund. Claire's heart pounded. She looked across the room at Ethan. He stared silently at the screen. His face slowly lost all color. "There has to be another explanation," he whispered. Claire wanted there to be one too, but the evidence kept growing. Over the next several days, Ethan quietly revisited every sermon he had saved on his phone, every notebook from the mentoring breakfasts, every promise about miracles, every assurance that sacrifice always brought blessing. For the first time, he stopped listening as a devoted follower. He listened as a husband who had nearly destroyed his own family. The words that once inspired hope now echoed with painful questions, and deep inside, a terrifying realization began to take hold. He had not been following God's voice. He had been trusting a man, and that man might have been using faith to steal from the very people who trusted him most. The truth changed everything, not in a single explosion, but in hundreds of quiet moments. The laughter that once filled their home disappeared. Dinner conversations became silence. The family photos on the living room wall suddenly felt like memories from someone else's life. Claire no longer looked at Ethan the same way. She wasn't angry because he had believed Pastor Brooks. She was heartbroken because he had made a decision that belonged to both of them. Alone. One evening after Lily had gone to bed, Claire stood by the kitchen window watching the rain fall outside. Without turning around, she asked softly, "Did you trust him? More than you trusted me?" Ethan couldn't answer. His silence became the answer. Tears filled Claire's eyes. "I would have stood beside you through anything," she whispered. "But you never even gave me the chance." Those words pierced Ethan deeper than any accusation ever could. For days, he barely slept. He replayed every conversation with Pastor Brooks. Every sermon, every mentoring breakfast, every warning Claire had gently voiced but he had ignored. The guilt became unbearable. He wasn't just grieving the money. He was grieving the trust he had broken. Claire stood at the front door holding a packed suitcase, her expression filled with heartbreak and quiet determination. Ethan stood several feet behind her in the living room, frozen in place, devastated, tears welling in his eyes, realizing his marriage is slipping away. Warm afternoon light streams through the windows, illuminating family photos on the wall and emphasizing the emotional distance between them. The open front door symbolizes separation, while the house behind them feels painfully empty. Days later, local news stations began reporting that financial authorities had opened a formal investigation into New Hope Kingdom Center after receiving multiple complaints regarding the church's Special Global Mission Fund. Investigators requested financial records. Former employees were interviewed. Anonymous whistleblowers began coming forward. The story spread rapidly across the city. Families who had donated their savings started asking the same question Claire had asked weeks earlier. Where had the money really gone? Watching the evening news from his now quiet living room, Ethan felt a mixture of fear, shame, and regret. He realized something painful. Recovering the money might be possible. Recovering Claire's trust would be far more difficult. And for the first time since this nightmare had begun, that frightened him more than anything else. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. What had begun as a handful of complaints soon became one of the largest financial investigations the city had ever seen involving a religious organization. Every day brought another headline, another interview, another former insider willing to speak. One by one, former staff members stepped forward. Some had resigned years earlier after questioning missing funds. Others admitted they had stayed silent out of fear. Several described being instructed to avoid discussing finances with church members. One former accountant revealed that donations intended for humanitarian projects had repeatedly been transferred into accounts controlled by senior leadership. A former administrative assistant described creating travel itineraries for luxury vacations that had been recorded in the books as mission outreach. Another employee produced internal emails showing expensive personal purchases approved using money from the Special Global Mission Fund. The evidence was no longer based on suspicion. It was documented. Investigators spent weeks reviewing bank records, invoices, contracts, and electronic communications. Then, before sunrise on a quiet Tuesday morning, everything changed. Black government vehicles pulled into the parking lot of New Hope Kingdom Center. Financial investigators entered the church offices carrying sealed evidence boxes. Computers were removed. Hard drives were cataloged. File cabinets were emptied. Dozens of boxes containing financial records were carried outside as television cameras captured every moment. Across the city, families watched the live broadcast in stunned silence. Claire stood beside Ethan in their living room. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. Hours later, the lead investigator addressed reporters. Investigation has uncovered substantial evidence of long-term financial misconduct involving charitable donations collected from members of the organization. City fell silent. That afternoon, authorities announced multiple criminal charges against Pastor Daniel Brooks, including allegations of embezzlement, fraud, and falsifying financial records. As he was escorted from the church offices, cameras flashed from every direction. The man who had once stood before thousands preaching sacrifice now walked past reporters without answering a single question. For many members of the congregation, the images were almost impossible to believe. Some cried. Some refused to accept what they were seeing. Others finally understood why so many questions had gone unanswered. Within days, investigators estimated that hundreds of families had contributed money to the Special Global Mission Fund, believing it would support missions, disaster relief, and humanitarian work. Instead, prosecutors alleged that a significant portion had financed extravagant personal spending over several years: luxury travel, high-end vehicles, designer clothing, private flights, exclusive resorts. The very sacrifices that ordinary families had made in faith had become someone else's lavish lifestyle. Ethan lowered his head. "I kept telling everyone they could trust him," he whispered. Claire gently reached for his hand for the first time in months. He didn't pull away. The truth had finally been uncovered, but the cost of believing the wrong person would leave scars that no courtroom could erase. 6 months later, Ethan stood before a small gathering of friends, family, and former members of New Hope Kingdom Center. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Oh, my wife, an apology that should have come much sooner." Claire looked at him quietly from the front row. "I believed I was following God," Ethan continued. "But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeking wisdom and started." Then Ethan turned toward his wife. "I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm only asking for the chance to spend the rest of my life proving that I've learned from it." Claire slowly walked toward him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she reached for his hands. "I can't erase what happened," she said softly. "But I can see the man standing before me today isn't the same man who made that decision." Tears filled Ethan's eyes. "Will rebuilding our marriage be easy?" "No," Claire answered honestly. "But it's worth fighting for." Over the months that followed, eventually they found a small neighborhood church. There were no giant screens, no promises of instant miracles, no pressure to give beyond their means. The pastor openly shared the church's financial reports every month, answered difficult questions without hesitation, and reminded the congregation that stewardship required integrity as well as generosity. For the first time in a long while, Ethan and Claire felt at peace. Their faith had survived, not because they ignored what had happened, but because they learned to place their trust where it truly belonged. One Sunday, as they walked out of church hand in hand, Lily smiled and slipped her small hands into theirs. Claire looked at Ethan. He smiled back. This time there were no secrets between them, no promises built on manipulation, only truth, only grace, only hope. And Ethan finally understood the lesson that had cost him almost everything. Real faith should never require blind trust in people. God doesn't fear honest questions, but fraud does. Some betrayals steal your money, others steal your trust. Ethan and Claire lost years of savings, but what nearly destroyed them wasn't the fraud. It was the silence that allowed it to happen. Healing didn't begin when the investigation exposed the truth. It began the day they chose honesty over pride, accountability over blind loyalty, and forgiveness over bitterness. Faith was never their enemy. Deception was. Because real faith is never afraid of truth. Real integrity welcomes accountability. And no genuine servant of God should ever fear honest questions. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever experienced spiritual manipulation or financial betrayal? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories that reveal the truth behind appearances. We'll see you in the next story.